Hello, everyone. Um, my name is Kelly Brown, and I would like to welcome you to this morning / afternoon's webinar offered by the Surdna Foundation on building demographic data capacity. I will be walking through a deck for you in advance of a request that the Surdna Foundation will be making of you, and we really hope this presentation will be helpful in helping prepare for that request. So as folks are joining, I'm going to pause because, as some of you may know, this is a repeat of a webinar that we offered last Thursday. We actually just offered 2 opportunities for people to attend the same session. So as people are coming in, I just want to welcome you, remind you that this will be the same presentation that was offered last Thursday with some very slight refinements just to get ahead of some of the questions. And but if you were on the webinar last week and thought that this was going to be a different one and you don't want to hear it again, just feel free to drop off. We won't take it personally, but of course you're welcome to stay on and share. So with that, let's just get started. First, who we are. Again, I mentioned that my name is Kelly Brown. I'm the CEO and founder of Viewpoint Consulting and have been working in the social sector and field of philanthropy for over 30 years now. And most recently have been working to strengthen the sector with a particular emphasis on inclusion and equity and really using data to advance those goals. I've been working with the Surdna Foundation on a number of projects over the years, and I'm very delighted to join the Surdna Foundation representatives and present this webinar. We're also joined by Brian Schultz from Candid, who you'll hear more from later, but Candid is also a new partner in this effort. And I just want to say I'm also joined by my colleagues Megan McVetti and Audrey Campbell, who will be helping us shepherd you through this process. So let me turn it over to Jeff from Surdna and have him give you some welcoming remarks.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Jimenez Carlander. I use he, him pronouns, and I get to serve as the Learning and Impact Officer at the Surdna Foundation. And on the Surdna side, I'm here with our Vice President of Learning and Impact, Jonathan Goldberg. Why don't you give a nice wave there, John? I want to thank you all for being here with us today. I feel like this is such an important session, and I want to extend our sincere thanks to Kelly and her team for the work that they've done for us over the many years, and other foundations, as well as to Kelly for the many years advocating for transparency within the sector, advocating for the importance of demographic data and how it's utilized, and obviously the best practices and collecting these data. Now, I have just a few points that I want to make before I turn it over to Kelly and the team. So the collection of demographic data is crucial for the Surdna Foundation for several reasons. Firstly, it's vital for us to have concrete facts to back up our arguments regarding funding disparities that we observe in the field. And I think that we can all agree that we have enough data that establishes that, for example, BIPOC-led organizations are often underfunded or not funded at all. That said, ongoing data collection is essential to monitor changes over time. And that data collection and its results ought to be transparently available, contributing to a public data set, which is really inherent in the demographics via Candid platform. Secondly, it's imperative for us at Surdna to hold ourselves accountable to our mission, to our vision, and to our values. We can intuit anecdotally that our grant making is serving BIPOC-led organizations, but it's important that we substantiate that intuition using data both for our awareness and also to be able to answer questions that we get about our funding from others in the field. And finally, to the extent that we can, we want to support efforts that both, one, provide best practices for collecting demographic data, which Kelly will speak to in just a moment. And we also want to support efforts that make this process as little of a burden as possible. We know that you are all being asked for this information all the time, and that's why we've partnered with Candid in this case, so that hopefully you'll be able to reach a multitude of funders by providing your data one time rather than getting dozens of separate requests. The last thing I want to mention is address any concerns that there might be about how demographic data may influence our grant making decisions. So let me be clear. These data do not determine our funding choices. Surdna's grant decisions are based on building profound relationships with grantees, many of whom we have partnered with for years. And to us, this is much deeper than a set of data. Our goal, as I said before, centers on transparency, accountability, and facilitating this process as best as we can. So if you have any questions for us on the Surdna side, John and I are available to answer any questions. But for now, I'll pass the floor back to you, Kelly, and the team. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really very helpful introduction, and it really builds on something that we've learned from many years of engaging nonprofits around this issue, is that it's important for organizations to understand why this data is being collected and what folks are using it for. And again, well, Brian is here. I don't know if you just want to say hi, Brian. He'll say more toward the end.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone, Brian. Right, we'll hear more from Brian toward the end, but that's going to be the team that's going to be engaging you today around this data. So as Jeff mentioned, this engaging demographic data is not new, and so before we launch in, we do want to just launch a little poll and see where are you in your data collection effort. So just while we're doing some housekeeping, fill in this poll and let us know, like, how familiar are you with this, collecting this data, engaging this data. We have our suspicions around what the poll is going to say, but we just want to give you a chance to weigh in. Throughout the course of the webinar, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, either one. Megan will be helping me monitor that and be sure we get those questions on the table. The slide deck that we're presenting and a recording of this webinar will be available hopefully by tomorrow, so that people have it in advance of the request for data that will come sometime next week. But we will also be providing information and contact information at the end for any questions that people have. So we'll encourage questions as we go through the deck, and also be sure to save some time at the end. So as we can see from the poll, most of you responded. Most of you are engaging in some way in this data, either on your organizational stakeholders, your board and staff, or the folks that you engage, and then some of you are engaging others. So we understand that people, people are. This is not new data to most folks, and we've learned that from the research. But the point of this deck is really to not just is to help folks go a little bit deeper into demographic data, which is really just information on identity of the people who matter, and to really help build your organizational capacity to engage the data constructively, effectively, in a meaningful way, to help respond, as Jeff referred to the numerous multiple requests for data that we know many of you get, and also to help you think about how to get this data effectively and correctly, and to basically sort of move the field beyond just sort of checking boxes and what have you, which is burdensome and irritating, and in many cases sort of counterproductive, but really to strengthen your capacity to engage this data overall. So we'll start with some high-level things around why demographic data is important, what it can help you do, the what what to collect, the tools and the nomenclature and the phrases and things that people really struggle with when asking about demographic data and identity. Some insights and pointers on how to get the data respectfully and correctly, some mechanisms and some different implications of how people get this data, address privacy and ethics issues. And then we'll also talk about, some of the issues given the larger context in which we're operating right now, and how sometimes the larger context can influence how people react to this data and use it and share it or do not. And then we'll conclude with some more details on the requests that you will be getting from Surdna. And I'll outline a range of resources and additional supports that we'll be providing to help you make that as painless as possible, and give some insights on how this effort is really contributing to trying to strengthen the field's capacity around this so that we get better data and it's easier for folks. So starting out with, the why. Why is this important? Again, some of you say it's important because we need to know who we are. The who of what we do is what we say. Sometimes people say it's important because people ask for it and we have to report on it. We know from engaging, as I mentioned, thousands actually of nonprofit organizations through various means and through various research efforts that most nonprofits are engaging this in some way, but are really burdened by different formats, different requests, what have you. We know this is a burden, but we also know that nonprofit organizations really understand how important this data can be, not only for reporting purposes, but also for insight. And so what we have gleaned from all of that process is sort of highlighting and pulling up like what it would be most helpful for nonprofit organizations with respect to this kind of data. So that this webinar is trying to sort of solidify and implement that. And we hope that that what this will do is to give people the opportunity to better make the case for this data and build their tools around it. So again, what is demographic data? Often demographic data in certain contexts is referred to as diversity data. It's only data that's used to understand, do we have enough Black people, or are we being equitable, what have you. Certainly, though, this demographic data can be used for those purposes. But demographic data is really just data on different characteristics of human populations. And it can include lots of different things. What is often considered in demographic data in certain contexts are issues of identity, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability, what have you, gender, what in many cases we consider those characteristics intrinsic characteristics, things that are relative, that are stable, in many cases, not all, visible, in many cases, not all, immutable, but they're characteristics of individuals that transverse lots of different other identities. But oftentimes they're acquired demographics that are also important for people to capture: immigrant status, your political party, your socioeconomic status, your military service. Things as of this nature are also demographic characteristics that people want to know about, and they interact in important ways with intrinsic demographics. The point is that all of it is really, really important when we're thinking about what to ask and what to engage. Also wanted to just remind people again to emphasize that, again, this kind of data is important for everyone. This is just an image of some findings from a leading pollster for the Republican Party. And it outlines the characteristics for the Republican Party around what demographic characteristics are important for them to track and understand when they're thinking about their own strategy. So this is not just data for a certain political persuasion, or bent. It's basic information that's critical to understand how people experience the world and respond to things. And we want to help you think about how is this information, again, beyond whatever reporting requirements you have, how is it important to informing your own work? What is important for you to know in terms of, geography, in terms of program design, in terms of language translations? Why is it important for you to really have a handle on these kinds of issues? It's also important to think about, because again, in many cases, the query is, and particularly in this case as well, the query is around the demographics of the organizational structure, the staff and leadership, in addition to stakeholders. I think in many cases, people find it easier and more understandable to understand the demographics of constituents or what have you. But it's also important to understand the demographics of the organizations that are leading and running organizations that are being funded. Is the staff and human capital of organizations reflective of the communities in which they're serving, or just operating if you're not a service organization? And how are organizations, not only as providers, but as employers, really reflecting the changing demographics of the community? So before we move on to like what to ask and how to ask, are there any questions that folks have on the why?
We haven't received any questions or comments, but just to emphasize, we do welcome them. Either use the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll be watching for those.
Absolutely. And again, feel free to capture them as we go along. We will be we're having some time at the end to capture the information. We wanted to set you up with, so what is the substance and the meaning around why this data is important? Interestingly, where people often start, however, is with the what. What do we collect? How do we collect it? What do we say? What are the terms? What are the tools? And people really get caught up in what I call the tyranny of the taxonomy. Is what tool do we use? How granular should we be? What are the changing terms? And we can see from this graphic and this illustration what as a country we felt was important to capture with respect to who people are, at least with respect to, to race and ethnicity, has evolved over the 200 years that we've been asking these questions. And the tendency has been, as you can see, toward more nuance and more granularity and more diversity, because that has been the nature of how we operate and how people experience the world. But I wanted to share this transition is to reinforce the point, is there's at no one point where you get the right thing, because these elements of identity are dynamic. And so when we think about the tools that we use and the questions that we ask and the formats that we share with you, that we'll be pointing you to encourage you to collect demographics on your own, we really want to be explicit that these tools are a careful balance to capture a moment in time and the dynamics of how people are generally understanding themselves and the general population, and how evolving and emergent ideas of how people want to be seen and how they want to be known comes to balance. So that's an ongoing tension that no one tool is going to collect. And so what you will find is that in many cases, the tools that you need may be more too granular, may use terms that aren't familiar with your population, but we've really done a lot of research to recommend efforts that try to strike that balance. And we also encourage people to think about including options for people to self-identify as something else. It used to be the category other, but the more respectful and appropriate option might be, I prefer to identify as someone else, because it allows people to take the time to write in how they want to be seen if the options don't fit with them. And I often kind of say that other isn't necessarily or I prefer to identify as something else isn't necessarily a catch-all. It's really insight, can provide insight into how people want to be seen. One thing that I do want to mention that I think will be that is at a real important sort of tension point as these tools evolve are the issues around multiracial and multi-ethnic individuals, as you can see from these images of these word clouds. That is as we know, a rapidly growing aspect of the population. In some cases, according to research done with the census, people who identify as mixed race can can range from as little as 3% to as high as 12%, depending on how the question is asked. So that is really an important category to capture. However, what we'll be doing just in terms of feasibility for data aggregation in this case is providing a category for multiracial, multi-ethnic that will roll all of these different potential combinations of people into one category, but you may find in your setting or your context that you may need more granularity. Something is similar for Asian Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians. That category is also one that is on the verge of actually becoming, much more disaggregated for really important reasons. I also want to point out that a lot of these terms and the tensions that are underlying them relate a lot. They're often generational. In many cases, younger people are adopting more emergent terms. They're situational in terms of sometimes people say, okay, I really want to be explicit about my multiracial identity. But in other situations, multiracial category is fine. And it's also regional because, as we know, demographics are place-based in many cases, and the dynamics there really can really vary. So I think when we ask for, again, we want to go back to remind folks that what we'll be asking for, focusing on are what we're calling intrinsic demographics: race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and ability. You will probably already collect or want to collect or need to know other kinds of characteristics that are important and be able to analyze how those other characteristics relate to the more intrinsic ones. It's not either or, there are not any that are more important, but there are limitations obviously for this process, and we understand that the intrinsic characteristics, because of their nature and in many cases their visibility, are characteristics that are often associated both with privilege and with disadvantage. So finally, I just want to reemphasize that the tool we're going to share with you or encourage you to use has been, the result of research and a lot of attempts to sort of align both with established taxonomies, but also allow for variation and flexibility. But the importance is that what it will reflect is a lot of research on how people understand the terms, how familiar they are. It allows aligning with these taxonomies allows people to just sort of see their data and their information in relationship to larger data sets. It allows people to use the same data for a number of instances, but it does not, and which reduces the burden, but it does not mean that people cannot collect more granular data. So reiteration, we know that these terms will change. We know that they are evolving. We know that you will probably be using things, and we also want to reinforce that we're to balance the tension between collecting good data, sound data, reliable data, and seeing everyone. So are there questions on the what before we go to the how?
Yes, we do have a couple questions here. The first one is a two-parter. How do you define groups? For instance, do you say Black? What does that mean? How are you defining that group? And then how do you confirm the accuracy of the data? Is there a check?
Right. So we don't define the groups. Again, we use the standard definitions that stem largely from the census. If you look at it's sort of the subcategories in the census data, there are lots of relationships to the descendants of Africans, both from Africa and throughout the diaspora. But we also know that in many instances, how Black is defined will be very salient to the context in which it's raising. There's an image that I sometimes share in terms of the differentiation between how people identify with respect to their race or ethnicity and how they are perceived. And I think for issues around race, that is a very complex and tricky context, is because sometimes people are perceived differently than how they identify. But we are, the research that we're proposing in terms of the taxonomy that we use will be in more alignment with how the census and larger standard government data sets define different races and different ethnic categories, which, as I mentioned, are constantly evolving. As some of you may be following the extraction of the Middle Eastern, North African context from the white race category, because people are in the process of redefining what that means for them. And then to the second point, the accuracy, there is absolutely obviously no way that any external entity can check the accuracy of what people are sharing. But in this next section, we will sort of give you some pointers and tips on ways on how to increase the accuracy, which is basically by asking people.
That's great. The other two questions are really segues into the how. So that will set you up, Kelly. First is, we've been thinking about collecting this data, but the biggest issue is tech. What tools or guidance can you give about incorporating or enhancing existing tech to accommodate demographic data collection? And then the second, related to the how, we do not ask people to disclose their sexual orientation. Not everyone is out. Folks feeling like the categories are limiting, supporting privacy, etc.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, so the tech tools we'll touch on a little bit. It's not quite as complicated as people think, but we will touch on it. But I think this, the first and most important point of, I think, this engaging this data is really asking people how they identify, what terms they use, and also having them consent to providing you with the information, what we call consensual self-reporting. This is essential to privacy, respect, and accuracy, especially for data that will be shared with other entities. And so it's important for people to be asked these questions. And while some folks say, well, I don't want to ask this question because it's not respectful, it's also important to remember that some people actually really want to be seen. And so while you might have a setting where you have 10 people and 9 people don't want to be asked these questions, don't want to share it, but one person actually does want to be seen and counted, you have to allow for that full range. But the most important aspect is engaging people explicitly and asking for them to self-report and to consent to what you're going to do with the answer that they choose to provide you, so that they can decide whether or not they want to share or not. I think of this is related to even the categories that people use when the person mentioned the limitations of certain categories. Again, if you looked at that word cloud that I shared earlier, those are just some of the different ways in which people want to identify. And if you allow them to choose that or select that, to self-identify the way they want to, that's a really important way to ask the question and allow them to give you the answer that they want to give, even if the category is not listed there. Because if you were going to list all the categories that could possibly there, it would be an endless list. But those other responses are the responses that help the standard categories evolve and change. What I do with respect to the tools, again, folks, there's a number of ways that you can get this data, and HR departments are typically pretty savvy at understanding how to collect certain kinds of personnel data on a record which is considered administrative data. It's a data that's collected on everyone as part of a process, like their personal record, their client intake assessment, what have you. Again, it's always optional for individuals to provide that information, but at least when it's part of a standard process, you have the information that people are willing to give you on certain categories as part of an ongoing thing. And it's usually related to reporting requirements and what have you, or even health insurance, things like that. Survey data is when you have a tool, you ask people for this information. Some people will respond, some won't. You'll have partial data on at a specific point in time. So it's often in response to a specific question. In this case, it might be what are your demographics, but at any given time, but it will only be relevant for that who responded to that tool and at what point. Again, because it's optional, when you tell people, when you ask the question, you give them the option of answering, and you tell them what you're going to do with that, and they can respond or not respond, given how they want to assign their their privacy issues. We also want to just acknowledge that what we'll be asking is individuals to report on other individuals, what's often called proxy reporting, and that sometimes moves through a process within the organization. Even a very small one has to go through lots of steps before they can share this data, which means they have to understand it, they have to understand who's asking, they have to either have or get the authority to gather it or to respond. They have to find out who has the data, and then they have to share it. And so we understand that asking for this data can be quite quite complex, which is why we're trying to provide guidance to these to organizations and trying to commit to a process that minimizes having to go through these steps many times for many different reasons, particularly if we want to emphasize that consensual self-reporting, asking people, engaging people, whether that's through a survey, whether that's through an email, whether that's through a face-to-face, and just being sure that you're disclosing how the data that you're asking for will be used, that you give them the option to respond or not, that it's as simple as it can be, but in some cases as detailed as it needs to be if people want to identify in more granular ways. And then just to be sure that you're asking when it's necessary, and when you need it, and not constantly. So I see there may be some more questions.
Yes, there an internal issue that we've heard from other organizations. So here's the comment: the culture around this type of data at our nonprofit is interesting. That our senior leadership, including HR, is tight-lipped on staff demographics as well as vendor demographics. How do we shift the culture to be more transparent around collecting this info?
Well, I think that's a really awesome question. It also sort of segues into, into the issues and why there is resistance, is because it's, we call this demographic data, and I think it's, using the term data makes it feel very, objective and quantifiable and neutral and what have you, but really it's basically information on who people are, and engaging who people are can be charged. It's complicated, and people are very often concerned around, will if they share this data or reveal it, will they be judged if they're not diverse? Will they be penalized? This is often the case for organizations sharing it with funders. Asking these questions actually requires people to ask the questions and get answers, and people often feel don't feel comfortable understanding what engaging those conversations and feeling that the questions are appropriate, and also navigating and managing that there will be in some cases some resistance and some concerns. And I think what we're trying to do, and that's why I opened with the why, is to help people understand that it's really important to know who people are. It's important for them to give them the space to tell you or not, but who people are matters, right? And you can't, if you don't ask and you don't engage, you can make assumptions, you can make guesses, you can overlook people, you can be where you're colorblind. It means you're just really not saying things that are important with respect to who people are, and those things matter for just pure respect and regard beyond the sometimes political aspects of it. Who we are is important to us, and part of, I think, the case for this data is that it's an important organizational muscle to build to engage the who of what we of what we do, because we are becoming more and more diverse and communities and global settings where people want to be seen. And so we really have to, organizations really have to build the muscle to engage this constructively. And I think that's the biggest case for other stakeholders and organizations to really say that this is not, this is not data around judgments. It's data around people wanting to be seen and respected and regarded, and to have information that allows us to have those cultures. People, do sort of say talking about races is racist or illegal, but of course racist is real. It's real, and not talking about things like this doesn't make them go away, and it doesn't make the differences. It doesn't eliminate the implications of the differences. It just makes you less able to really confront them and engage them. So I do want to, again, in reference, it's sort of related to that, we are in a time where engaging these issues, well, I was going to say we're in a time where engaging these issues is highly charged, but I would argue that engaging these issues is always highly charged, but it's heightened, I think, right now, and heightened in very specific ways, and in ways that, involving lawsuits and Supreme Court rulings and what have you. And so, we just want to remind people that as of right now, the legal framework for requesting the state and asking for the state is under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is designed to prevent discrimination. More organizations that have employees of more than 100 are required to collect and share this information with the EEOC. But there are, as folks may know, emerging conversations about what does discrimination actually mean. And while there's no evidence that collecting and engaging the state is illegal, it is a moment where people do have to be on alert to understand that regardless of how information on who people are is being used in a larger sphere, it's still important to know who people are, simply to treat them with the kind of respect that they warrant. And so we want to frame this information and engaging it explicitly in that spirit, while still understanding that people are going to, that we are an environment where identity is under contention. Before I move to the request, are there other questions, Megan, that people?
No, not right now, but keep putting them in there if you have them.
Great, absolutely. And again, I think we're going to still have time at the end for a little more discussion, but we do want to get into the actual requests that you're going to be getting soon, and then a little bit information from Candid, which is going to be the mechanism through which this data is conveyed for most folks. I should just mention is that this is the third time I think the Surdna Foundation has engaged this data. The last time was through a survey of all the organizations that it funded. This time it's getting the information, but it's in its commitment to really sort of streamlining the effort and strengthening the field, it is going to request information from organizations with an EIN. That means if you're a nonprofit with a 990 and you have access to either claim or update a Candid profile, there is a space in Candid for you to enter in data into that profile, and then Surdna will extract the data from that mechanism, so that you don't have to fill out any surveys. For entities that are not EINs, fiscally sponsored projects, university programs, collaborations, things like that, most of which have some fiscal sponsor relationships, you have some relationship to some kind of EIN, you will be getting a survey specifically for your project, asking you to report on the demographics of your various stakeholders that more or less align with a traditional nonprofit structure, a board, maybe an advisory board, advisory committee, leadership, maybe co-leaders, staff. In many cases, you may have staff. In some cases, your staff may be consultants. For both organizations. In other words, the survey will allow some flexibility for you to respond to the different stakeholder arenas in a way that makes sense for what you do. For both nonprofits and projects, the issue around consultants and freelancers, which often comes up in general, and certainly more in the nature of the way the work is changing, we will give you the flexibility to define those folks and to decide if you want to capture them in your demographics, and define, and to the degree to which you define them as staff or what have you. In other words, people who are doing the work, implementing the work, guiding the work is really what we're trying to get at. It is a note for the field overall that there is some work that needs to be done to build a more organized and aligned mechanisms to collect this information on that particular stakeholders, and this is particularly true for arts organizations and others. Again, the EINs will be requested to submit their organization through Candid. The non-EINs will get a survey, which we will collect, Viewpoint will collect, and then we will integrate it into Surdna's data system. So all your demographic information will be attached to your entity and project. So are there questions on that before we turn to Candid, Megan?
There are, and I think Brian and Jeff would be well positioned to field this first one. All of this seems like it would be a heavy lift for our team and nonprofit, and are there grants that support this work? So really addressing is it a heavy lift? What kind of lift is it?
Brian, you wanna jump in on that?
Yeah, I would say that especially the first step for sharing leadership demographics of your nonprofit should not be hopefully as difficult. It's your CEO level information that you can share there. And then I think from that process, and as Kelly talked about, building the muscle of collecting this data, that really kind of gives you a great way forward. And there are a lot of templates, and I will share some in here as well. And then some webinars we have on 10-minute trainings of why this data is important, how to collect it, and some survey templates that Candid as well offers to get you started.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is yes, I was going to mention the amazing resources that Candid has. And you'll see in a few slides that you know we've gone through the process of putting our own data up here as well. And Candid has done a really good job at creating a platform that is the interface is intuitive, and it is not as complicated to input the data. I think the main challenge is kind of what Kelly has kind of walked us through about collecting the data itself.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, I think you know, again, part of the reason why we're going into sort of the richness of engaging who people are is because one, you know, this isn't just checkbox data. This is data on who people are. Just as someone put in the Q&A, engaging identity can raise all kinds of stuff for people. And so it's not, you know, it's not trivial, and it's important to be respectful. But what we're trying to do with the technical aspect of this is it's almost sort of thinking about it as sort of front loading your costs, right? It's like, okay, it might take you a little bit of a process to get the data the first time or what have you in some routine way. But if you put it into Candid, and we can build the will in the field for the data to be extracted via this mechanism, then what we're trying to do is to forestall the requirement to do this over and over again in lots of different ways, for lots of different for different purposes. So it might require, and I would argue that it's worth requiring some investment in an organizational commitment to getting this data, accurate data, in a sound and respectful way. But once you have it and you've built that culture, if you share it through some sort of shared common portal, hopefully that means you don't have to keep doing it over and over again. You might have to do it regularly as people cycle in or out of your organization, but hopefully the process of investing up front, or even if you're already doing it, which many of you are, you know, sort of really being intentional about aligning your systems and why this data is important and what are the best tools for you, that hopefully on the other end you can end up with something that is that saves you in the long run. I would guess. And Brian, I don't know, I sort of jumped into your space, but I know that there are some resources from Canada, and if you wanted to talk through.
Yeah, so I put 2 links into the chat. And hi, everyone. I'm Brian Schultz, pronouns he, him. I'm a director of partnerships at Candid. And if you have questions through the journey, my email address is in this PowerPoint. Feel free to reach out. I'll either be able to answer them or I'll be able to direct them internally to the right people. And so there are a lot of resources. We have 10-minute webinars on here. We have a template I shared, a PDF that takes you through the actual questions that are in the profile, how to ask them, like Kelly said, not to guess. And then it kind of takes you through all of those resources. The other thing I'll say is that the Candid profile is holistic. So beyond just demographics, there are a bunch of other information that your nonprofit can enter, like your mission, your values. And to be quite honest with the question of funding, we have seen more and more that having a filled out profile and being transparent does lead to greater funding. Studies by universities have shown that as well. And that more and more donor advised funds, which we've all heard about, are using the Candid profile to find new nonprofits to fund or nonprofits they're unfamiliar with by not only looking at demographics, but looking at other information. And so the hope is that this does reduce the work in the end for nonprofits, and that you can fill out this information once a year, update it. It's accessed by numerous different sources, researchers, foundations, and that more and more funders are using the Candid profile in other ways beyond just demographics, and they're using it to pull mission, vision, financials. And so the hope is that that reduces the amount of work you have to put into applications and proposals, thus making you have more time to do the work that is very important to your nonprofit. But there are a lot of resources available, the 2 links there, and then feel free to reach out. And there's more resources Candid offers beyond just demographics as well. So if you have any questions about that and finding funding resources, there are a lot of resources we offer for free for that as well.
Yeah, this is really sort of a, a shift, I think, in the field, because I've been doing this, as I said, for over 30 years. And we're in a world where data is gold and information is gold, and managing is important, and really trying to think about how to strengthen the field around data in general, but in particular this kind of information, because not only are people asking for it, it's important to to know and to remember that, asking is not requiring of individuals. So people should dial back the anxiety if people don't want to tell you or participate, because that is also data and that's information. And the portal allows for people to kind of say, individuals who choose not to respond or not to reply. So this is not a situation where people are required to report on every single person in some way. It's really just capturing what you may already know, what you thought about, and also facilitate a process for you to think about how to engage this. I would also say that Surdna Foundation is going to make this request of you, but they've also done it themselves. We just worked with them to collect their demographic data. And just as an image for those of you who don't already have a Candid profile or have the data in there, this is kind of what it looks like. It's very high level. It's only reported at percentages. We know sometimes people are concerned that if I'm a small organization, that people are going to be able to find out who's Black and who's gay and what have you. But that is really got at the point of data collection, because you really give people the option to engage or not engage. So even if, for a CEO or leader, that's transparent, because that's if you have data on your CEO, it's transparent, what their parameters are, but that means that that person has given you the permission to share that information publicly. And so that's what, what should be reflected on this dashboard. And I think I saw something about updating the information. I think Candid has regular ways to remind people to update. And what we're hoping is that, again, if you have 50 people in your organization and you have some turnover, you just go in and you change the numbers to reflect your new people. You don't have to kind of keep going through a process to redo it. But it is important to keep it accurate, obviously, because you want to keep information on everything that you do accurate and up to date. So before we open it up for larger questions, I just want to share a quick timeline. You've gotten, because you got this notice around this webinar, you've got a notice around the whole process in February. We've done these webinars, and the request for the data will come or sometime next week, March 11th, both for EINs to put their data into Candid, and for the non-EINs to complete surveys that will come from Viewpoint. If you are an EIN and you've got this and you already have your data in there, you're in Candid, you're done. You don't have to do anything, maybe update it or what have you, but you may not have to respond at all if you already have an updated Candid profile. We're going to give you some time because we know it's a process, so about a month to get together. We'll provide you with a lot of resources, a little bit of a timeline so that you can kind of see, okay, I should be doing this by now because the deadline is here. And then we'll do some analysis and presentation. And I believe, I can't remember if Jeff mentioned this at the beginning, at some point, Surdna is going to share some information or insights into what they've learned from this process. So again, Brian's your contact person for Candid. I'm your contact person for the survey. I'll be working with Megan and Andres on that. When you get the deck, you'll have a link to the, when you get the request for data, we'll have a link to the webinar and the deck that I just presented today. And then I'm throwing in an article for folks, which just came out yesterday from Pew Research Center that really, I thought, was a very thoughtful and thorough discussion of why we ask these questions and the art and science of asking these questions. I just thought it'd be very helpful for people to kind of see, what this means and how it's evolved over time. So that is the end for us in terms of the presentation. So let's see if there's some outstanding questions before.
Yes, we have a really important one. Before getting to there, just to emphasize what Brian covered in the Candid resources. So one of the questions about templates and workflows is those resources are terrific and they offer those. And a bonus to all Surdna partners is that Brian's on call and Kelly's on call, Viewpoint's on call. So just please reach out to make it as easy as possible. So there's a big question here this person said, we moved to collecting this data through self-identification, an open-ended question, and let people elaborate the way they want to. This has led to people sharing very traumatic memories and experiences. So we are debating going back to closed questions with multiple answers. I think we've seen examples of that here. Do you have any advice on choosing qualitative, open-ended versus closed questions?
Well, qualitative and open-ended obviously allows for people to express themselves exactly the way they want to, for better or for worse. But it will not ever really allow you to think about it in a larger sense or compare it with aggregated in any way with other data sources. It's really information that you're asking for from your people on how they identify. It's more of a conversation. And so I think I think your experience may have been important for you to really probably make some important contact and relationships with aspects of your staff and leadership. But the close-ended options give people some framework. One, people are very used to answering these questions or not. Some people don't like to answer them, and so they're used to not liking them. They give the categories, but again, if you would still provide for the opportunity for people to identify in some other way, they can be a medium between allowing people some parameters while still giving them an opportunity to share what they want to share about who they are. So my answer to your question is obviously, I think, the close-ended options, have well-researched, well-engaged, robustly tested. They're good for capturing information and being able to use it in a larger sense, but the always having an option for people to weigh in as individuals, I think is always an important part of that.
Thank you. And then a question about if your data is already on Candid, do you need to update it? And maybe this lines up with the timeline you just went over.
So yes, the answer would be yes, you should update it to make sure it's accurate and it's capturing your people and who they are. We have learned, there are lots of research and support, but we just did some research with Candid about the nature of the interface. People found it very easy, very straightforward. If it's already in there, it's probably, take you 5 minutes if that, to update it and fix it. But the important thing for updating it is again, that it's capturing, who you are in the moment, and that's what we're asking for.
Also, just note that when you update, it does show for demographics the date that it was updated. And so if funders are receiving this information in various ways, some through their grants management systems. Once you update the data, they get it in real time. And when they look at it, it will show the date. So some funders will see if your data is like 2 years, if it's been 2 years since you've updated it, likely they're going to request that you go in and make sure it's accurate and see the date from when it was last updated.
Anything else?
We don't see other questions or comments now, and we're coming up on the hour, so it might be time for your final words of wisdom.
Yes, well, if haven't said enough words already, I've said a lot of words. But I'm just very excited about where this is moving in the field. Again, while it sounds like a lot, we just want to emphasize that knowing the who of what you do, who you are, being respectful of people, seeing people, allowing people not to be seen, all of that stuff is, it's just really, really critical and really important. And Surdna, I think, is a foundation among others that really understands the nuance and the complexities of all of that. You have to start somewhere, which is why data is crucial, but that is absolutely not the end goal. It's one piece of information in a much larger process and relationship. But we wanted to provide you with this opportunity to strengthen your ability to do that effectively. A lot of your questions are about culture and the reality of identity, and that's the most important thing. It's not the numbers that show up on the dashboard, but we wanted to give you some support around how to strengthen, to start if you haven't already, but also to strengthen your ability to engage these questions, importantly, and properly, effectively, respectfully. And we're here to, you'll get lots of resources. We're here for any questions along the way. We welcome them. This effort is really part of a much larger, longer effort to strengthen the field around this, to reduce the burden and increase the insight. We've come a long way in the years that we've been going on, and the Surdna Foundation is a partner in not only getting information for its own insight and strategy, is a real resource and making a contribution to strengthen the field overall. So if there is nothing else, I don't know if I want to give you the last 4 minutes, but if you want to jump in, please jump in with any questions or feedback. Otherwise, we will give you back 3 minutes and just look forward to hearing from you. Jonathan, Jeff, Brian, did you want to say any final closing words?
I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to joining us on this webinar. We appreciate it, and my email is on the screen. Please do reach out if you have any questions. We've made ourselves available to help you throughout this process. Thank you.
Awesome. On that note, we will we'll let you go. Thanks so much. Bye.
Take care.